Introduction by Lawrence Hill. Some 3 decades ago, when I was a grade 8 student in the Toronto area, I became convinced that Canada's past was as boring could be, and that history textbooks had but one purpose: to put one to sleep. My history teacher was deaf in one ear and seemed never to listen with the other, and he spent entire lessons reading out passages about the fur trade while we copied it all in our notepads, word by word. I dropped history after grade 9, never took another course in it, and had to wait some 20 years to discover that history actually fascinated me. Over the years, as I developed into a writer myself, I learned that there are many ways to bring history to life, to make it exciting and vibrant and immediately important to the reader. There are, of course, many terrific textbooks about history, and they are well worth reading. But drama of the first rank puts a personal stamp on history that allows us, as readers, to feel the pain and sorrows and victories of the characters caught up by huge world events. More than giving us dates and details, historical fiction, when it's well done, helps us understand and feel what it was to live in a certain time and place. Although I didn't hear about it in my schools as an elementary and junior high school student, the 400-year history of Blacks in Canada is full of drama and action. It reaches back to Mathieu da Costa, a free Black man who came with an expedition that founded Port Royal in present-day Nova Scotia in 1605. It includes the Blacks, some free, others enslaved, who came to Canada as United Empire Loyalists at the time of the American Revolutionary War. It encompasses the abolitionist movement, led in part by John Graves Simcoe, Upper Canada's first lieutenant governor, who persuaded a reluctant cabinet, some of whom were slave owners, to institute a partial ban of slavery in 1791 until it was finally abolished in 1834. And it also includes the Underground Railroad, which forms the backdrop of Barbara Smucker's Underground to Canada. Thousands of Black men, women, and children escaped slavery in the United States and fled to Canada, aided by conductors of the Underground Railroad. There were no real conductors, and there was no true railroad. The railroad and the conductors were simply metaphors for a complex, highly secretive system by which sympathetic people, white and Black, helped fugitive slaves to escape and avoid being recaptured on their long, dangerous run north to Canada. Although fugitives were arriving in Canada via fixed Underground Railroad passages by the 1820s, a major new influx of Blacks escaped north into Canada after 1850, when the American government passed the Fugitive Slave Act, allowing slave owners to recapture fugitive slaves who were hiding in the free, northern states and drag them back south into slavery. One of the unique and special features of Underground to Canada is that its protagonist is a young girl, Julilly, who is ripped away from her mother as a girl and sold to work as a field hand on a cotton plantation in the Deep South. Although Julilly is assisted by Alexander Ross, who, in real life, much as we see in the book, was a Canadian doctor who posed as an ornithologist while visiting plantations to advise slaves secretly about how to escape north to Canada. She is a clever and courageous girl who shows great character in her long escape north to St. Catharines, Ontario. A certain degree of human ugliness exists in Underground to Canada. For one thing, readers occasionally encounter the word nigger, 2 puny syllables whose concentration of fear and hatred is perhaps unmatched in the English language. Nigger is a distilled insult if there ever were one. Teachers and parents who read this book with young people have a moral obligation to explain that nigger dates back to days of slavery and represents an attempt to dehumanize Black people. After all, no slave owner could claim an iota of humanity or respect for God unless he could convince himself that Black people weren't really people, after all, but a sort of subspecies, to be sold and sorted and used and abused like horses and pigs, or worse. The N-word is offensive to the extreme by modern standards, as was the institution of slavery, and as was the Holocaust. But writers, teachers, and parents do no one a favor by pretending that such things didn't exist. Much better to acknowledge them, to understand them, and to ensure that our children and grandchildren are even better equipped than we are to learn from the monstrous mistakes in our past. At one point in Underground to Canada, A man charged with moving slaves from one plantation to another interrupts a conversation between them and some strangers on the road. "Don't you listen to that Quaker abolitionist and that free nigger boy," he cries out as he whips the men in chains. They got evil in their words and destruction in their ways. It's an ugly but realistic representation of slavery, and it could serve as a good starting point for discussion at home or in the classroom. Language aside, it might be said that Barbara Smucker pulls back from describing the full bloodiness of the institution of slavery. Nevertheless, she does provide a few glimpses of just how barbaric slavery was. Julilly is ripped from her mother's arms and sold to another plantation in another state. Children are forced to eat cornmeal mush from a dirty trough, pushing and shoving on hands and knees, sucking and dipping in the yellow grain until there was nothing left. An overseer named Sims savagely whips slaves, including children and old people, every day. However, like thousands upon thousands of other people whose freedom had been stolen, Julilly survives and, ultimately, embarks on her Underground Railroad trip north to St. Catharines. Although almost all of Underground to Canada unfolds in the United States, Barbara Smucker is to be credited for acknowledging that life in this country was fraught with difficulties for Black people. Another excellent book for people who are interested in Black history in Canada is The Narratives of Fugitive Slaves in Canada. It differs from Underground to Canada in that it offers lengthy, first-hand accounts by Black people of their own experiences in slavery and of their flight to Canada. Those who want to know more about the experience of slavery, as documented by former slaves, would be well advised to read the classic slave narratives, Penguin Books Canada Limited, 1987, edited by Henry Louis Gates. Jr. It includes 4 fascinating accounts: the interesting narrative of the life of Aloud Equiano, the history of Mary Prince, a West Indian slave, narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, and incidents in the life of a slave girl, the story of Harriet Jacobs. In the meantime, Barbara Smucker has created a sensitive and dramatic story about a young girl's flight from slavery, and some 3 decades after it first appeared in print. Underground to Canada still serves as a wonderful introduction to a vital and fascinating element of Canadian history. Note to the reader: the escape from Mississippi to Canada by 2 fictitious characters, Julilly and Liza, could have happened. It is based on first-hand experiences found in the narratives of fugitive slaves, on a careful study of the Underground Railroad routes, and on the activities of 2 abolitionists, Alexander M. Ross of Canada and Levi Coffin of Ohio. I have avoided too much dialect. It is difficult for many readers to understand. Barbara Smucker. By Martin Luther King Jr. From the Massey Lectures. Toronto, 1967. It is a deep personal privilege to address a nationwide Canadian audience, over and above any kinship of U.S. citizens and Canadians as North Americans. There is a singular historical relationship between American Negroes and Canadians. Canada is not merely a neighbor to Negroes. Deep in our history of struggle for freedom, Canada was the North Star. The Negro slave, denied education, dehumanized, imprisoned on cruel plantations, knew that far to the north a land existed where a fugitive slave, if he survived the horrors of the journey, could find freedom. The legendary Underground Railroad started in the South and ended in Canada. The Freedom Road links us together. Our spirituals, now so widely admired around the world, were often codes. We sang of heaven that awaited us, and the slave masters listened in innocence, not realizing that we were not speaking of the hereafter. Heaven was the word for Canada, and the Negro sang of the hope that his escape on the Underground Railroad would carry him there. One of our spirituals, Follow the Drinking Gourd, in its disguised lyrics contained directions for escape. The gourd was the Big Dipper, and the North Star to which its handle pointed gave the celestial map that directed the flight to the Canadian border. Chapter 1. Night music droned through the slave quarters of Jeb Henson's Virginia plantation. The words couldn't be heard, but they were there beneath the rise and fall of the melody. Julilly hummed them as she sat in the doorway of her cabin, waiting for Mammy Sally to come home from cooking in the big house kitchen. She was as still and as black as the night. The words of the song beat in her head. When Israel was in Egypt's land. Let my people go. Oppressed so hard, they could not stand. Let my people go. Old Massa Henson didn't like this song. He said it came when there were whisperings and trouble around. There were whisperings tonight. They murmured beneath the chirping of the crickets. They crept from ear to ear as soundless as the flickering of the fireflies. Even though June was just beginning and there was summer heat mixed with honeysuckle sweetness in the air, Julilly shivered. She tried pulling her coarse tow shirt about her knees, but it had long since grown too short. It wasn't that Massa Henson didn't give her clothes. He was good to his slaves. It was just that she grew faster than any other 12-year-old on the plantation. She's tall enough to work beside the grown women in the cotton fields, Massa Henson said. Mammy Sally scolded about this. My June Lily is just a girl that's grown too fast, she pleaded. Grown women had to pick more cotton and they worked longer hours. It was because Julilly was born in June and Mammy Sally liked lilies that she got her name. Most folk slurred the words together and they came out Julilly. But they didn't for Mammy Sally. There were no ring games tonight in the dusty yard before the cabin doors. The children whimpered, fretful and uneasy. Julilly went inside the cabin where she lived alone with Mammy Sally. The flickering pine knot in the corner fireplace held blue flames. They had no warmth. There was loneliness and emptiness inside. When Mammy Sally came, the warmth would spark out in the fire, and the shadows would bring sleep. The little slave cabin was tight-roofed and plank-floored, as were all the other slave cabins at Massa Henson's. Better than any other slave cabin in all of Virginia, Mammy Sally declared. She liked the big house, too, where it was cool and wide and the logs were hewn smooth against the walls, and the plank floors were shined and polished. The whisperings that hung in the nighttime air had started this morning when old John, the coachman, drove Missy Henson into town. Julilly and the other slaves heard about it later. Missy Henson sat uneasy and restless in the carriage seat. She talked to old John of moving north and of selling things. She talked of how her husband, Jeb Henson, was old and sick and had to go to the hospital in Richmond. She said they had no kin to leave things to. The land's used up, old John, she mourned. It just has no more life to raise tobacco or cotton or any other crops. Old John agreed. He knew that the masters in Virginia had used the land until it bled and died. They had no crops for sale these days, so they were beginning to raise and sell slaves instead. There was fertile land in the deep, deep South. The masters there needed slaves to work their fields. When Missy Henson and old John drove into town, there was excitement on the courthouse lawn. Missy Henson pretended not to see. Old John, who couldn't read, heard the white folks speak of handbills plastered on the courthouse door. We'll pay top prices tomorrow for prime field hands, they read. Old John's hands trembled on the horse's reins. A slave trader from the deep South was coming to their town to buy tomorrow. Jeb Henson was making plans to move. Old John and the other slaves at the Henson plantation knew about the buying of Virginia slaves. Word of it spread like a wind-whipped flame to one plantation and then another. Rumors spread. Some said the buyer lined the slaves up one by one like cows and pigs. They'd sell a mother to one man and all her children to another. In the deep South, folks said, even the little children tote hoes bigger than themselves to chop the cotton. Then they get whipped 'cause they don't finish the work the overseer set out for them. Massa Henson didn't whip much on his plantation. Too soft-hearted, some of the slave owners said. This afternoon when old John came home from his trip to town, he hobbled straight to the stable boys. A slave trader from the deep South is comin' tomorrow. His voice trembled. The stable boys ran like hopping toads to the children who carried water to the field hands in the cotton rows. A slave trader from the deep South is comin', they whispered. Up and down the cotton rows the message spread, faster than a winging bird. Julilly heard, chopping cotton in the blistering sun. When lunchtime came, she ran to the big house to tell Mammy Sally. For one instant Mammy Sally straightened her tall body and lifted her proud head. "Oh Lord," she said, "we is needin' your protection now." Then Mammy Sally drew her lips together and was peaceful. Fears that had flapped around Julilly's head like blackbird wings flew away. Mammy Sally would take care of her. She was Mammy's only child. Now the night had come. Julilly huddled shivering near the cabin door. The plank floor of the cabin was warm and dry. The whippoorwill called its evening song and the round, orange moon spread its gentle light. But her feet were cold. Her hands were icy. A strangeness spread about like an uneasy quiet before a storm. Then Mammy Sally came, her bare feet silent on the soundless dust. She clasped Julilly's hand, but the coldness and the strangeness didn't go away. She pulled Julilly close, bending toward the small blue flame. The light showed indigo across her strong, lined face. It glistened in her troubled eyes. "Julilly, child," she spoke softly, rocking slowly back and forth. "You know the slave traders in our town? Some of the slaves is to be sold." "Who, Mammy?" Julilly was cold again and shivered. "There's no way of knowin'," Mammy shook her head. "Massa Henson's sick and gone away, and Missy Henson says there's no way to keep us all together. Most of us have known no other home." Mammy rubbed her hand across the comfort of the floor. "This is where you were born, Julilly." Julilly knew all this, how Massa Henson was better to his slaves than most, how her daddy died the day that she'd been born from being bitten by a snake, all those things from long ago, safe things that tied together with planting time and harvest time. Then Mammy stood. She lifted her head high, and the white head rag that covered her graying hair showed soft and a little golden in the firelight. She straightened her shoulders, almost reaching to the top of the cabin door. Her lips drew firm, and her eyes pierced deep into Julilly's. In them was the sting that a bullwhip makes and the hurt of a wounded possum. "We've got to pray hard, Julilly, and if the good Lord can't help us now, we've got to believe He's goin' to help us soon." "Yes, Mammy." Julilly felt pride in this tall, handsome woman. "There's 3 things I want to say to you, child." Mammy drew Julilly close again. "Pray to the good Lord. Remember to be proud that you had a strong, fine daddy and a Mammy that loves you." Mammy Sally paused. She pressed her mouth against Julilly's ear. "This is secret talk I'm tellin' you now. Hold it quiet in your head and never let it out your mouth. There's a place the slaves been whisperin' around called Canada. The law don't allow no slavery there. They say you travel north and follow the North Star, and when you step onto this land you are free." Rustling footsteps outside the cabin caused Mammy's arms to stiffen. She pushed Julilly gently away and, lifting her voice, spoke crossly. "Now, Julilly, you crawl down on that blanket in the corner and go to sleep. Before you know it, 4 o'clock will be around and the morning bell will be ringin' for another day's work." Talking for those who might be listening from the outside was always different from talking inside to those around you. Julilly knew this and smiled. She lay down on the hard floor beside the fireplace and wrapped a thin blanket around her. Canada. She thought the name again and again inside her head. The slave trader meant some kind of trouble. But there had never been trouble on the Henson plantation. She and Mammy Sally wouldn't be sold. Julilly yawned and hummed a quiet tune, and the unsung words made her smile and forget the trouble-filled day. "Massa sleep in the feather bed. Niggers sleep on the floor. When we get to heaven, there'll be no slave no more." Chapter 2. Morning came to the slave quarters of Master Henson's plantation before there was light in the heavy, black sky. It was 4 o'clock and Master Henson's old ram horn bellowed and tooted until nobody slept. Frying sow-belly smells from the cabin cooking fires helped wake the children. Julilly reached for a hoe cake and a tin cup of buttermilk that Mammy Sally poured. From the barnyard the roosters crowed sharp and clear. As on every other morning, Julilly smoothed down her crinkly hair and twisted it tight in a knot at the back of her head. But Mammy Sally, who always wore a clean, white head rag neatly tied, this morning put on a black one in its place. There was no laughter in her full, strong voice as she called to one slave and then another who passed by their door. A worried frown stitched lines across her forehead. "Child," she said to Julilly in a yearning, mournful way, "there's trouble ahead for us nigger folk today." Her lips pinched firm and her eyes flamed with angry courage, but her voice stayed quiet. She gathered Julilly's hands into the strength of her long, black, calloused fingers. "Lord help us," she said. "The field hands are gonna be sold today. You are one of them, Julilly. You and I could be pulled apart. Julilly couldn't understand. Mammy Sally couldn't let this happen. Mammy shook Julilly into listening. If we are sold apart, Julilly, and the Lord forbid, don't forget that freedom land I told you about. You and I are strong. We'll get there with the guidance of that star and the good Lord's help. A jaybird voice screeched suddenly outside their door. You field hand niggers. Line yourselves up along this path and don't you loiter. The sound of a zinging whip cut the air. Some of you ain't gonna chop no cotton today. Mammy Sally held Julilly close as they walked outside and joined the field hand line. The man with the jaybird voice strode back and forth in front of them. He was a big man with a short, thick neck. His cheeks puffed and jiggled as he walked. Julilly noticed that his fingers puffed, too, over the whip that he flicked in his hand. He had a toothpick in his mouth that stuck between two yellow teeth. Julilly didn't like his oily skin. His faded brown hair was tangled and dirty, his baggy pants were streaked with drippings, and his little eyes were green and sly. He strode toward Lily Brown, a shy young mother barely 16. She clutched her 2-year-old Willie in her arms. The fat man paused briefly beside her. His tiny eyes narrowed, and he rubbed his oily hand down Willie's cheek. He nodded at a younger white man behind him. Put him in the wagon. Willie was ripped from his mother's arms without a comment. Lily screamed and fell to the ground. Julilly started to run toward her, but the firm hand of Mammy Sally grasped her shoulder. The fat man was stopping in front of them, clamping the toothpick hard between his lips. He stuck a fat finger into her mouth and squinted at her teeth. Satisfied, he pushed back her eyelids. Looking at me like old John does his horse, Julilly thought and flamed with anger. This one will do, the big man called toward the young man who had just dumped Willie in the cart. She's strong and healthy and still growin'. Get over there, girl, and get into that cart. He strode off down the line. Julilly didn't move. She looked at Mammy, and for the first time in her life saw fear in Mammy Sally's eyes. Do like he say, child. Mammy's voice hurt and choked. You got to mind that man in order to save your life. Don't forget that place I told you about. The fat man looked back and screeched. Get in that wagon, girl, or I'll use this whip and teach you how to jump. There was moaning now and crying up and down the line of slaves. The big slave trader didn't care or hear. He lashed his whip in the air, pulling children from their mothers and fathers and sending them to the cart. Julilly moved toward the long, wooden cart. Her feet pulled her there somehow, and she climbed inside. She looked for Mammy Sally, but Mammy was already being pushed with the older slaves far down beyond the tool shed. Julilly strained to find Mammy's black head rag. It was gone. Mammy Sally had disappeared. A red sun boiled up into the sky, making patches of heat wherever it struck the uncovered earth. Julilly sat still and numb in the unshaded wagon. Little Willie Brown whimpered beside her. She wanted to comfort him, but she couldn't lift her hand. She found it hard to swallow and wondered if she could make a sound if she tried to speak. Other children began climbing into the wagon. They were smaller than Julilly. They moved near her, their little bodies twitched like a wild bird she had caught once and held for a moment before it broke into flight. 3 men were ordered into a line behind the cart. They stood like broken trees, their hands dangling like willow branches in the wind. Julilly knew each one. There was Ben, solid and strong and as black as midnight. He could chop a woodpile higher than his head when the others still had little mounds up to their knees. There was kind, gentle Adam, whose singing was low as the sightless hollow in a tree. And then there was Lester, the mulatto with speckly skin and angry eyes. Each one had a wife and 1 or 2 babies. They didn't move when the fat man with his puffed, oily fingers clamped a chain around their legs. Julilly watched. The chain became a silver snake. It coiled over the ground, around the men, and up onto the back of their cart. It bit into a lock that held it fast. Another strange white man led a workhorse in front of them. Julilly was afraid to look at him. She felt the tug and jerk of the wagon and the bounce of the man as he jumped onto the driver's seat. Giddy up, he cried, snapping the reins. The snake chain jingled in protest while the men, who were not used to it, tried to swing their bound legs in some sort of order. The fat man, with the toothpick still in his mouth, rode behind them on a smooth brown horse. They moved down the dusty road, past the empty slave cabins and around by Master Henson's house. It was empty. There were no curtains in the tall windows or chairs on the wide, shaded porch. Massa and Missy Henson were gone. Old John came through the wide front door, hobbled and bent. He shaded his eyes to watch the chain gang and the wagon load of children. When he saw Julilly, his back straightened. Pulling a large, white handkerchief from his pocket, he waved it up and down, up and down, up and down, until it became a tiny speck and disappeared. Tears ran down Julilly's cheeks. She couldn't stop them, but she made no sound. The fat man didn't notice her.